Hello everyone, and welcome to the second part of the GTAC Tech Talk webinar on the new system configuration for a security center system. Thank you for being with us today. My name is Derek Schaefer. I'm a technical training e-content specialist with Genetec, and I'll be your host for the webinar. We also have some members of the Genetec Technical Assistance Center standing by who are assisting with the webinar questions and answers. Our first GTAC expert is Nancy Potel, who is a technical support specialist, and she'll be answering any video-related questions you may have. And we also have Abraham Rodriguez with us for the webinar, helping with any access control questions. And of course, running the show and helping with questions as well is Scott McFall, who is an e-content specialist with the Genetec Technical Assistance Center. If you have any questions during the webinar, you can type them in the questions section of the GoToWebinar console, and one of us will get back to you with an answer as quickly as we can. In case we need to verify any information for a question, we'll note the question and who asked it and get back to you via email as soon as we have an answer for you. All the questions and answers for the webinar will be posted on the GTAC Tech Talk section of the Genetec Technical Assistance Portal forums about a day or two after the webinar has finished. If you have any additional questions or comments on the webinar or the GTAC Tech Talk webinar series in general, you can post them in this section of the GTAP forum as well. All the videos of the previous webinars can be found by going to the Tools section and then go to Videos and then click on the GTAC Tech Talk section. Now there are two ways that you can view the webinars. You can either stream them in a browser window by clicking on this icon right here, or you can download a zipped Windows media file by clicking on the second icon right here. If you'd like to receive emails concerning the latest additions to the Genetec Technical Assistance portal, you can log into the GTAP, go to the My Account section, and then go to Email and Notifications. From the Notifications section down here, you can check the boxes of the subjects you're interested in and select how often you would like to receive an email when there have been additions to those subjects. To put a checkbox next to a subject, the frequency has to be set to daily or weekly, otherwise the options below it here will be grayed out. You can also edit your subscription to our two Genetec newsletters in the email subscription section from the same page. And of course, don't forget to hit the Submit button on the bottom of the page to save your changes. Alright, let's take a quick look at the goals for the webinar today before we start looking at the actual topics. Now, when planning these two webinars, the primary focus was to give our customers a resource for being able to quickly learn how to set up a very basic system. So if you're new to Security Center and just got a demo license, or if you're going to be setting up your first small system, hopefully you'll find everything you need in these two webinars. We wanted to cover the subjects in a logical order as well, to make the most efficient use of your configuration time and not have to do very much backtracking. Now, since the Security Center system can have three components, video, access control, and LPR, we're going to look at entities for all three. In some systems, you may not need all of them if you only have, for instance, a Synergist component installed, but we're going to cover all three just in case you do have all of them installed there. Now, there are some more advanced components that can be added to the system, such as Plan Manager and GSA Mobile, but we do have other webinars and information to cover the installation of those, and so we're going to stick to the basics of a system configuration for today. Okay, we're going to take a brief look at the agenda. It's basically the components we're going to be configuring, so I won't go into a big description of each. As we mentioned, this is part 2 of the webinar. In part 1 last month, the main parts we set up were the partitions for dividing up your entities based on who can see them, the schedules, which can be used for multiple purposes, like archiving and allowing access to the system, and then we took a look at the role creation and configuration. We also added our users and user groups. We set up our privileges for them, and then we added the physical video access control and LPR units. So we're going to pick up from where we left off there. starting with our access point entities and working through the other entities until we ended off with a backup of our final system. We're going to start at looking at the entities we need to create at this point. Now, since we created our roles and units in the last webinar, this is a good starting point for today. Now, the last thing we did in the previous webinar was to add our video access control NLPR units. So now we're going to create the entities associated with access points, which are doors and elevators. We're going to start by looking at doors first, and then get to elevators in just a minute. Both of these entities can be created from the logical view, so our first step is to open a logical view task from the home screen. Click on the Add an Entity button on the bottom of the screen, and then choose to create a door. This will bring up the door creation pop-up window. So we need to give the door a name and a description first. The door name should be something relevant to the location so that it's identifiable in the list. We can assign it to a partition from here as well, since we do have those set up already from the first webinar. In our original example, we were looking at a small bank branch, and we had a vault room in the back with one door and a couple of cameras. Now, these are high security entities, so we only want administrators to be able to see and manage them in Security Center. To do that, we could have created a high security partition and limited the accepted user list to the administrators, but an easier way is to simply use the system partition, which basically does the same thing in automatically restricting the entities to only be viewed by members of the administrator's user group. Hit the next button down here, and we're going to name the door sides. So by default this is just set to A and B, but if you'd like you can be more descriptive than that. We can also select the access control unit to use from here, which we should have added to the system in the previous stages. If we have selected a unit, we can now assign the door components to the hardware. This can be changed later on, so if you aren't sure about which output is connected to the buzzer or which input for the manual station, you can leave it empty and you can go back and select it later on. Hit next and you'll get your creation summary, and then we just need to hit the create button to actually create the door entity. We can configure a few things from the door that were not options in the creation, but before getting into that, I want to point out something that we mentioned in the first webinar. If you look at the relationships in the door here, and we expand the partition section down here, we can say that there are no partitions listed there. This is what an entity will look like when it's been added to the system partition, as we did for this door. It's basically a hidden root partition that all the other partitions are added to. So the first thing you might want to configure after creating the door are the properties, which we have the where we have the door behavior and the timing as well. So here we have a door selected. We're going into the Properties tab. So from here we can see how long the door will unlock for, which is the standard grant time, how long to give the cardholder to cross the entry sensor, which is the access time right across from it here, and how much extra time to give cardholders on top of the normal grant and access time if they have the extended grant time option turned on, which we're going to take a look at in a few minutes. So here's the extended grant and the extended access time right there. Now there are also various options for sending events if a door is held open too long, if the door was forced open, and how to handle the recs or request to exit if one has been set up for the door. Let's move on to the next tab, which is for setting up our unlock schedules. Now this tells the door when it will be open for everyone without any credentials required. The important thing to note here is that we can use the exception schedules to make management easier. For example, if we have a door that has a guard stationed in front of it for the entire work week, we could put the work week schedule in the unlock column like we did here. This way credentials are not required while the guard is present, but the cardholders will have to present their credentials before and after business hours. Now, additionally, we know the guard is not present on holidays since there is minimal staffing, and we don't want the door to be automatically unlocked. In that case, we want to add the holiday schedule we created in the exceptions list here. Okay, we'll take a very brief look at the hardware tab here. If we do want to make any changes to the inputs, outputs, and readers that were assigned as part of the door creation, you can do that from any of the fields here. One of the things we can do from here that was not covered in the entity creation is camera association. So to associate a camera with a door side, we just need to click on the Associate a Camera button, which will create a camera selection menu like we have right here. We just need to choose a camera from the drop-down list, and once it's created, we can actually use the preview button right here to make sure that it is actually the correct camera, the one that we were looking for. If we want to associate more cameras, we can just click on the Associate a Camera button again, and it's going to make additional drop-down menus below it here. If you need to set up a door side for using a card and a pin, or change the type of reader associated with the door side, hit the pencil icon next to the reader to change the reader options. Now, the last tab up here is for our door access rules. Access rules use a combination of schedules, card holders, and access points. Now, since we've only created the doors and the schedules, we're going to take a look at the access rules after we have our card holders created. If you need to go back and make any changes to the access rules that are applied to a door, this is where you'd need to go. Let's take a quick look at the second most common type of access point, an elevator. We create them from the logical view task, just like we would create a door. Just do add an entity and choose elevator. Now, the name and the description that we provide should be basically general for the elevator itself, such as freight elevator or north side, to indicate where it is or what it's used for. Hit next, and we need to specify how many floors the elevator is set up for. Once we click on the Create button here, it's going to give us the option of naming the floors. We can leave the default floor numbers here, or we can give it something a little bit more descriptive. If you need to create more floors or delete floors, you can do that using the buttons on the bottom of the list here. Hit Next to create the elevator, and it will show up in the logical view with an entity for each floor that we created. Here we have our elevator, and here we have the 2 floors that we created. Now, since we haven't associated any hardware with the entity, everything is going to show up offline. We see all the entities are in red here. To choose the hardware, we're going to select the elevator, and then we're going to go to the Floors tab. We can set a preferred unit from here if we want to, but the most important thing is to have a reader selected for the cabin. We can use the pencil icon to change the reader options like we had in the previous section when we were creating a door. Such as using a card and pin option, or the type of reader that we're using in the elevator cab. And now the same thing as we saw for the doors, we can also associate a camera from the elevator from here as well. Now from the list of floors, we can edit the properties of a floor and assign output relays to the elevator control system, and inputs if we want to track which floor was pressed. We can also assign a camera per floor in case we have a camera outside the elevator that we want to use. Going to the Access tab for the elevator, this is where we can set up our access rules or apply a schedule as an exception to an access rule. For example, if there are workers that constantly need to move things around the building on the weekend, we can put in an exception for the weekends where all floors are unlocked regardless of the access rules that have been applied to this elevator. Now there is an advanced tab for the elevators as well, where we can set the grant time, which is how long we have to select a floor after presenting a card, and how the elevator will react if there's no power to the controller. If we do have it set to normal like this, everyone will have free access if there's no power to the unit. to deny access to everyone when there's no power, we can set it to active instead. Alright, so now that we have our major entities created in the logical view, we're going to look at visually organizing those entities. Where we use partitions to organize things from a security perspective, we use areas to organize entities by location or just for visual sorting in the entity selector. Creating areas is pretty simple. All you need to do is click on the Add an Entity button and choose the area entity type right here. There's no wizard or creation steps. It just creates the entity and automatically has the name in edit mode. If you want to, you can type in a new name based on the grouping you've decided upon. So for example, we've created three area entities here. So for our bank branch, we can create the entities based on the physical locations that we have set up. So we could have an area for the customer section right here. We have one for the offices, and we have one just for the vault as well. Now, if you want to move the entities into an area or make an area a child of another area, just click and hold on the entity and drag and drop it on the area to assign it to. So taking a look at our existing entities, we've moved them into the areas that we created, so we can see what that looks like from here. Now the cameras that have been associated with the doors will get moved as well because they're considered a child entity of the door. So if we expand everything, we can see that we've got the cameras and the elevator floors and everything associated with its parent that we moved as well. Now by default, the areas are added to the public partition. If we had any areas that we need to change the partition membership of, we can click on the area and make those changes from the Relationships section of the Identity tab. In our case, the offices should only be seen by people in the confidential partition, so we'll add the confidential partition like we did here, and we've removed the public partition as well so that it's not visible to everyone. Since the vault area should only be seen by administrators, we remove the public partition and we're just going to leave it blank like this, which puts it in the system partition. Now when you're moving objects or areas, you will be prompted to add the children of the selected partition as well, or to the selected partition, in case they haven't been configured as such yet. Okay, looking at an area here, the Members tab for an area is used to set if a door is on the perimeter of an area or if it is captive, which means it's inside the area and not used for area functions such as anti-passback or people counting. You can also set which door side is entering the area and which one is exiting, which is important for knowing who is in an area. So basically we need to have this set up properly so we know the direction of the person that's entering or leaving the specific area. If you want to set up anti-passback or an interlock on the perimeter doors associated with an area, you can do that from the Properties tab. Now for more information on anti-passback or interlocking in the areas, just take a look at our webinar on Access Control Configuration Part 1, Doors, Areas, and Zones. Now once again we have a last tab here for access rules. This is so we can apply the access rules to the doors of the area. We can come back here and apply those rules once we have created them. Alright, the next step is to create some badge templates for use with our cardholders and credentials. It's easier to add them now so that we can select them while in the cardholder creation process. Now, we went over this in pretty good detail about a year ago in part 1 of the Access Control Configuration webinar, so I'll just touch on it briefly here. The interface has had some improvements in one of the recent updates, but the main tools have remained the same. To create a new badge, go to the Badge Templates tab of the Access Control task, which is what we had been looking at previously when we were adding the roles and the units. And basically just you just add a badge from here and give it a name here. Once again, just like we saw with the areas, there's no wizard or pop-up window for this, so you just have to change the name from the entity selector and then just go on to the Badge Designer tab on the right here. So the main toolbar is on the left, and that allows you to select items, draw rectangles, draw circles, add text, add pictures, and add barcodes as well. Now above the editing window, you'll have tools for configuring the badge properties, such as the size and if it is in portrait or landscape orientation. We have tools to import or export the badge design, and we have editing tools for the object that you do have selected at the moment. When you create a badge element, such as a rectangle, you'll have other context-sensitive widgets appear below the template. These will help you configure the available properties for the badge element you have selected, such as the color, the opacity, and the border. Right-clicking on an element will bring up a quick menu with some of the editing commands, and commands to change the element order for overlapping events, and we also have the border controls here as well. Now when we're adding a text element, like we're doing right here, you can choose to add fields from the cardholder or credential properties, like the cardholder's name, the expiration date of the credential, or any of the custom fields that have been associated with the cardholders or credentials. We can also right-click on the text element to change the font style, the font color, and the alignment in the text box, such as centered or left justified. Now, these are just the basics for the badge designer. Once you have the elements the way you'd like them, apply the changes and you're ready to use the template for card credentials. Our next step in setting up a system which includes access control is to add cardholders and credentials. To set up these entities, we need to be in the access control task. We'll take a look at setting up the cardholder groups first, so we can assign cardholders to those groups as we go. Now there are two cardholder groups there by default, all cardholders and visitors. If this will be a very limited system, you may not need more than that. For the bank example, we're going to want to create cardholders for the guards, and ones for the branch managers who will have access to the office doors, and also one for the maintenance staff. Now remember that these are the people who are using credentials to access the doors and elevators, not the ones using the security desk, so we generally need groups for anyone who will be moving around the physical location. There isn't much we need to set up in terms of the properties, just if we can add visitors to the user group. We can give an email address for the group as well, and the security clearance for the group, which can be used when a threat level is activated to restrict access to certain doors and other access points. The security clearance is only visible to administrators. Now once we have the cardholders added, we can select them from the section below here and add them to the group list. There isn't much else we need to do here. If we want to restrict who can see a particular cardholder group, we can modify the list of partitions as well. For now, we'll put the branch managers into the confidential partition, like we have right here, and remove them from the public partition. Moving on to the cardholders, we have two ways of creating them. So you could create everyone manually, but if you're creating a new system from scratch, an easier method would be to use the import tool. While we are creating cardholders, we will have the option of creating credentials to go with them. This can be done manually, or it can be done with the import tool as well. If needed, we can also use the import tool just to import credentials as well. Okay, so what do we need when we're adding a cardholder? If we do it manually, the first thing we're going to see is it's going to ask for the cardholder name. After that, it's going to ask to name the cardholder entity. By default, it gives it the name of the cardholder. And we can also assign them to a partition from here if we'd like. In the first webinar, we were looking at adding some custom fields. If you have any in the system that are assigned to cardholders, it's going to ask for those next. We had set up a mandatory emergency phone number right up here, and we also put a couple of non-mandatory fields asking for some information about the cardholder's car, which have been grouped together under the car group right here. Next, it will ask us if we want to create the credential for the cardholder, or if we want to wait and do that afterwards. If we say that we do want to create the credential, we have two ways of doing so. We can either enter in the information manually, or we can select a reader and present a card and let it scan the information. Now, before doing the manual or automatic creation, it's going to ask you to give the credential a name. So by default, it gives you the name of the cardholder and credential as the name after that. But if you know you're going to have multiple credentials set up for a cardholder, such as a card and a PIN code, you might want to specify which one this is so it's easier to find from the entity selector. For manual creation, it's going to ask you for all the relevant information, such as the facility code and the card number, or a PIN code to assign to it if you have that selected. In automatic mode, you can either choose a USB reader that is connected to your workstation, or you can specify one of the doors for the reader to use. It's going to give you a creation summary after that to verify that all the information has been entered, and finally create the cardholder and the credential if it's been specified. So that's the manual method of doing this, but there is a second way that we mentioned that we can do all this, and that's by using the import tool. To use the import tool, we need to have a CSV, or comma separated value, file with all the information in it. The easiest way to generate one of these is to create the information in a spreadsheet, such as Excel, and then save it in CSV format. The CSV file will look something like this. Now, it's important to make a note of the column positions in each field, as we're going to have to specify that in the import tool. For example, in our spreadsheet here, we have the cardholder's first name, the cardholder's last name, then their email address, and we've put their cardholder group after that as well. We've put our credential information next with the credential name here, the PIN code, and the status, which is if it is active or not. To run the import tool, go to the home page of the config tool and go to the tools section on the left here. First, we need to select the file to use, and then the partition the cardholders and credentials will be added to here as well. Then it's going to ask for the formatting details of the file and the card format if used as well, right here. If you're going to be using a badge template, like we've created in the previous step, then you can specify it in this section here. The drop-down will give you a list of all the existing badge templates on the system. Next, it's going to give us the first line of the file. There's the first line here as a sample. And it's going to ask us to choose the fields that go with each column. If you know you have cardholders that have the same first and last name, you may need to specify more fields as keys in order to distinguish one cardholder from another. The email field here would be a good idea to have selected in that case. Once it runs through the import, it'll give you a summary like this, and it's going to include any errors here if there were any. The errors include any type of error as well as the column and the row of the problem field, so it's going to make it easier to go back into your spreadsheet and actually find the problem that that the import tool is having trouble with. If we go back to our cardholders tab, we can see that all the cardholders have been created here. So they've been imported, and the credentials should be associated with them as well. Once we have the cardholders created, let's take a look at a few things we can modify, starting with the properties. Now, when we're setting up our doors, we assigned a value for the extended grant time, which basically means that the door can stay open for longer without any warnings coming up or events generated. We can select who can use the extended grant time through the cardholder properties. So this is it right here, use extended grant time. You just have to switch that over to on. This would be a good idea to set up for people who have limited mobility, such as somebody who has a broken leg. We can also set up a personal security clearance level in here if we need to. So just in case that person is part of a cardholder group, but is an exception and needs a different security level. Cardholders can also be deactivated from here, or set to expire after a certain time. Moving on to the Picture tab here, we can use various methods to import a picture for a cardholder, such as loading from a file on your PC, or taking a picture from one of the cameras. Once we load the picture, we can right-click on it and choose to edit the picture, where we can do things like rotate the image, crop it, or we can choose a transparency color like we did in this case here, where it takes out the background. Now don't forget, we also have the mandatory fields, like we saw when we manually created our cardholder. These can be included in the import as well, and will show up as selectable fields. Alright, one last thing to do in this area is to take a look at credential creation. We saw how to do that as part of the import process, and part of the manual cardholder creation, but it can be done on its own as well. Now, we're still doing that from the access control task, but we're doing that from the credentials tab up top here. Click on the Add Credential button on the bottom, and you're going to get the credential creation pop-up window. This is very similar to what we saw when we were creating a cardholder. It's going to ask you if you want to do a manual or an automatic creation. Then it's going to ask you for the entity name. And from here we can assign it to an existing cardholder if we want to. So in this case we've selected a cardholder here. Now just note that this is not a mandatory step, so if you're creating guest passes for use later on, you don't need to assign them to a cardholder right away. The next step is to manually enter the cardholder information, or the credential information, excuse me, or you can scan it at a reader if the automatic detection option was chosen. Hit the next and then the create button after that, and the credential will be added to the list. If you need to modify who the credential is assigned to, the credential status, the expiration, or anything like that, you can do that from the properties of the credential. You can also assign a badge template using the last tab right here. Alright, we've seen a few places already where we can have add access rules to the entities. So let's get those set up right now. Now once again we're doing that from the access control task, and we're going under the access rules tab right here. Now we use the access rules to define the 3 W's for access control. It defines who can access a location, which is the list of cardholders. It defines where these cardholders can or cannot go, which is a list of doors, elevator floors, and areas. And it also defines when they have access to the allowed locations, as defined by the selected schedules. Now the access rule can be used to either grant or deny access to the specified locations. As well, if you look up here, there are 2 default access rules that are created automatically in the system: the all open rule and the lockdown rule. Take a look at the icons here. You can see which one is allowing or granting access, and which one is denying. If you see that little icon here, it means it's set to deny. Now, both of these are applied to all card holders on an always schedule. The difference is that this one allows the access on the set of locations, and the other always denies it. So if you have a door that's not behaving as it should, a good first step would be to see if it's been added to either one of these access rules. Since the list of card holders and the schedules cannot be modified, typically these two access rules are not used and should not have any doors, elevator floors, or areas assigned to them. Now let's take a look at our example and set up a rule for the maintenance staff. We just need to hit the Create button on the bottom, and it'll bring up the Creation pop-up window. Now, the first thing we need to do, of course, give it a name, and we have to select the partition that it's going to be in. And after that, we need to pick the schedule for the access rule. Now, for our maintenance staff, we don't want them to be able to come into the building on holidays, but all other days are fine. So we're going to select the holiday schedule for now, and we're going to make a change to that in a second. Hit Create to add the rule, and then we're going to take a look at the Properties tab of the access rule that we have selected here. We selected our maintenance staff rule that we just created. Now, just a note, we're going to make another rule for all employees and staff to access the site at all times, so what we're really setting up here is an exception. For that reason, in the Properties of the maintenance staff access rule, we're going to change this to deny cardholders when the schedule is active. And below that, we're going to add our cardholders to the list. So we're going to choose our maintenance staff cardholder group, which is the ones that are being affected by this rule. Now we still need to set the where for this access rule. To do this, let's go back to the Identity tab for the access rule that we have selected. And we're going to expand the Doors, Elevators, and Areas section right here. Now all the doors should be affected by this, so click on the section here, and then we can click on the Add button on the bottom. From the pop-up entity selector, we can choose our doors, floors, and areas. We'll choose our doors here. And we can also, as you see, we can select multiple entities by using the Control and the Shift key as well. Now once those entities have been added, we know all the criteria have been met, the who, the where, and the when, so we can move on to our other access rules. Now, if you're not seeing the door behavior that you're expecting, you can try running the Access Troubleshooter from the Tools section of the home screen. From here, you can see who should be allowed through a door at a specified time. We can see what a cardholder should have access to. So you choose the cardholder here. It'll tell you what access points they have access to. You choose the time as well. Or if you use the access diagnosis, you can basically do a full simulation of a cardholder on an access point at a particular time. You can either choose the cardholder, you can use the credential as well. So if they have multiple credentials, that's a good thing to test here. Now below it here, once you hit go, once you have everything selected, it's going to tell you which access rules are being checked for the access point and if they're allowed to pass or denied based on those rules. Alright, so we've been looking at a lot of the access control stuff just now, but if we have any additional components, now's the time to set those up. One of the things we may want to set up are hot lists for your LPR units if you're using the AutoView component of Security Center. You can create those from the LPR task. We're going to pick the hot list tab. Now when you create a new hot list, the first thing you're going to notice is the entity is going to turn yellow. And it's going to give you this warning up here. Now the reason for that, if you take a look under the properties, you're going to need to specify the hot list path in order to get rid of the message. This can be a network path or it can be a local path as well. Now the hotlist file can have fixed field lengths, or you can use a delimiter to separate the values. You specify that right here. Now delimiters can be colons, commas, semicolons, or tabs, but if you're going to use the tabs, just make sure there's only one tab between each data entry. Below here, make sure the attributes match up with the fields in your hotlist file, and you can reorder these if you want to by selecting one and using the arrows on the right to bump it up or down on the list. If you want to change the color of the hotlist hit that shows up on your map, you can do that from the Advanced tab of the hotlist. Depending on the type of the AutoView system you're using, such as fixed cameras or mobile on a vehicle, you may have other options to set up, such as permits or parking facilities. Now another common entity that you may need to set up are zones. Zones can be created from the logical view task and are used to link inputs and outputs and perform other actions on the Security Center system based on the input states. Now there are two types of zones, hardware and virtual zones. Hardware zones operate independently of Security Center based on the access control unit they're connected to. The input sensor and output relay must be on the same physical unit. Virtual zones can use any inputs or outputs from any recognized hardware device on the system, since all the control is being done from Security Center. When we create a zone, the first thing we need to do is give the zone a name and choose the partition that it belongs to. In our example, we're going to make a virtual zone for a panic button in the vault room. This is only for the managers to see and configure, so we're putting in the confidential partition here. The next step is to choose if it's a hardware zone, which is considered just a regular zone, or if we're going to put it in, make it a virtual zone here. This is an important choice as the zone cannot be reconfigured after creation. If you need to change a zone from hardware to virtual, you're going to have to delete it and create a new one with the same rules. Once we've created a zone, you're going to notice that it's red in the entity selector. This is because we have not associated any inputs with the zone yet. So the first thing we need to do is go to the zone properties, and we're going to need to set up a few things in here. So in the list here, we're going to want to add an input or a number of inputs that are going to be monitored by the zone. If you have multiple inputs selected, you can specify if the zone is considered in the active state, if all the inputs are closed by using the AND operator, or if only one of them considers the zone to be active by using the OR operator. The next step is to set up our events down here. Most of the time we want an event to trigger when the inputs go into the active state, but we can also have an event triggered if the inputs return to a normal state or when the inputs report a trouble state, if that's supported on the hardware. Now when the zone changes state to active, normal, or trouble, it's going to trigger whichever event we have selected in the list here next to whichever state. Since many of the actions are already associated with other parts of the system, it'd be a good idea to make a custom event based on the event that we wish to report. So to do that, we're going to go to the System task, and we're going to go under the General Settings here, and we're going to select the Events section on the left. Now by default that's going to give you the Event Colors tab on the right here, so just choose the Custom Events tab instead. We can add a custom event, and we'll give it a relevant description, such in this case we're going to put Vault Panic Activated, and we're going to choose the entity type to associate this to. Now when we go back to our associated events, you can see from the selection menu here, we do have our custom event in the list of selectable events. One last additional entity type that we may want to create is a camera sequence. We use camera sequences to be able to view multiple cameras in a set order with a specified viewing time for each one. This makes it easier to monitor a related group of cameras in one tile without having to constantly switch between them. For our example, we're going to create a camera sequence to view the camera in the back office area, which can be left on screen by any branch manager to keep an eye on who is walking around in the hallways. So we're going to create our camera sequence from the logical view, and we're going to give it a relevant name here. Now, since only the branch managers will be using this, we're going to put that in our confidential partition. Note as well we removed the public partition here so that not everybody can view it. After that, switch to the Cameras tab and add each camera that you wish to view. When adding a camera, you can specify the dwell time, which is how long the camera will be displayed in the tile, and we can send any commands as well. So this can be used if you have a PTZ to go through to different preset positions, or you can have it run a pattern as well. Now if you do need to change the order once you've added your cameras, you can do so by using the arrows on the right side of the camera list. To use the camera sequence, you just need to drag it from the entity selector into a security test tile, just like any other camera. Alright, so one of the major components that uses many different parts of the Security Center system are alarms. Since we've set up all the entities we may need to use for alarms, we can set those up in the system now. We can add and manage alarms through the Alarms section of the Alarms task. We can do that from the from the home page of the config tool from the task section here. So in our example, we're going to set up an alarm to alert the guards that there is a potentially unauthorized person in the office area of the bank. Alarm creation does not bring up a pop-up window. The alarm is created in the entity selector tree with the name in edit mode if you just want to type a new one in there. So we're going to type in a new name, call it unauthorized person. Now since this is an alarm that we want the security guards to interact with, we want to make sure that it's in a partition that they have access to, which is the public partition in this case. Let's take a look at the properties next, where we can set up who sees the alarm and what entities are associated with it, and we'll look at the advanced configuration options in a minute. On the top of the properties, we can give the alarm a priority level between 1 and 255, where an alarm with a lower number will take precedence over an alarm with a greater number. This is used when multiple alarms are displayed in the security desk tiles, so the one with the higher priority, which is in this case the lower number, will be displayed in the tile first. Now we need to set up the recipients list after that, which determines who's going to get the alarm. For our alarm, we want the security guards to know about it, but we also want any branch managers who are logged in to know about it as well. So we're going to add both of these user groups. Once we have those added, you may see a broadcast mode if you've got more than one in there. And basically that's used to determine if the alarm is sent to everybody at once, or if it's going to send it to one user or user group, and then the next user or user group after a configurable length of time. Now the last section in the properties is to associate any entities with the system, so they can be brought up in the security desk tile with the alarm. So from down here we just need to hit the plus, the create button here to add an entity. So in our case, the camera would be the obvious choice for an entity to associate with the alarm, but we can also bring up doors, zones, card holders, and a lot of other types of entities. In our case, we're going to add any cameras that are in the office hallways, but we could also add the doors if we wanted to, and that would add the associated cameras with them. The last step in setting up alarms is in the advanced section. From here we can set up the reactivation threshold, which is basically the time the system has to wait before it can trigger this alarm again. We can put a link and for a URL in here that will give the guards a procedure to follow for an alarm investigation. And we can put the alarm on a schedule as well. So any alarm activation attempts that happen outside of the scheduled time will be ignored. Other features include being able to set the alarm to automatically be marked as acknowledged after a configurable number of seconds, and the ability to prompt to create an incident after an alarm has been acknowledged. And we also have down here the video display and recording options. Okay, so we just made some alarms, so what's our next step here? Well, we need to know how to set up the actions that can be used to trigger the alarms or perform other functions on the system. An action is always triggered by an event that happens on the system, such as a door being forced open or a camera seeing motion. For that reason, we like to call these event to actions quite often. To set up some actions for the system, we need to go to the home page of the config tool, go under the tasks here, and we're going to open a system task under the general settings option right here. Now of course we have several categories in the general settings, so make sure we have the actions one selected on the left here. Now from here we can manage all the actions on the system, but if you want to see the individual actions linked to an entity, you can usually find this in the relationships section of the identity tab, like we have in this camera right here. To add more actions to a system, we just hit the create button on the bottom of the action list, and we can also delete and edit highlighted actions from this page. Once we do create one, the creation wizard will pop up, and the first thing we need to identify is the type of entity that the event will be coming from. We're going to choose to set up an action to notify the guards when the door to the vault room has been forced open. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to pick the door entity type. And then once we hit next, we're going to choose the door from the list. As well from the bottom we can choose a particular door side, but if we want a door forced we need to choose the both sides option right here. The next step is to choose the event that will trigger the action. So from the list of events that can be generated by a door, we'll choose the door forced open event right here. We also only want this to happen during the work week, so we're going to choose our work week schedule down here. If we want to perform an action on the same event on evenings or weekends, we could set up a second event to action after we set up this one. Finally, we want to tell the system what to do when it gets the specified event, so we're going to pick the send a message option right here. Now, when you pick an action from the list, you'll see that most of them do have additional parameters that can be specified. In our case, we have to pick the recipient of the message, and we pick we type in the text to send in the message as well. This is basically going to pop a window up on the screen for any of the recipients with this text message here as well. So once we hit next and create the action, it's going to be active in the system. So if anybody forces the vault office door open before presenting a valid card or PIN, it'll pop up a message on the screen and any of the security guards logged in can go and investigate it. Now we could also set up an alarm for this and associated cameras to the alarm and chosen a trigger alarm action like we did right here. Now in this situation you can choose the advanced alarm configuration here. So we'd have to have the alarm condition to be met where the door must be closed and the user acknowledge that the alarm has been resolved. Okay, we have one last step here, which is important but may sometimes be neglected, and that's to set up our backups. Now that the whole system has been set up, we should save a backup so we have a clean point to restore to in case something gets misconfigured or there's a problem with the system. The first place to start is the server admin, which you can get to by clicking on the server entity in the network view, like we did right here, and then we just go to the server admin tab. So we just go down here to the database, hit the backup and restore button to bring up the window, and then choose the backup folder and hit backup now. It's going to run through the manual backup and it's going to let you know when it's been completed. The last step from this section is to set up the automatic backups. Now this is going to use the backup folder that we specified, and we can say when to do it as well. So we enable the automatic backup here, and we should probably pick a time when the system's not in heavy use. And as well below here we can say how many backup files to keep. Now this is just for the directory database, which is very important and a good start, but we may want to keep backups of the databases used by roles as well. So we're going to switch over to our roles view in the system task for that, and we're just going to take a look at the archiver for this example. So if a role has a database, it's usually listed in the Resources tab. So under the Archiver Resources, we just need to click on the Backup and Restore button, and that's usually below the database information, and then we'll hit the Backup Now button. Once again, it's going to run through and tell us when it's been completed. And then once we go back, we want to set up the automatic backup time as well. Now one thing to note here is if we do have a failover server set up for the archiver, we may want to actually set up the backup on that machine as well, since they usually are using two different databases. You can do this for any of the roles where you want to make sure you have a backup of the database, and once you've got that done, that's basically it. You've set up your system and you're good to go. Okay, so that just about does it for the webinar for today, and should pretty much cover everything you need to know to get your demo system or your new system up and running. Once again, if there's any subject that you're interested in that we didn't cover today, take a look at the webinar videos on the GTAP, and we may have covered it there in detail in a previous webinar. We're going to leave the session active for about another 10 minutes or so in case you have any additional questions for Nancy, Abraham, Scott, or myself. And in case you need to review the webinar or know someone who would like to watch it, we're going to have the video posted in the video section of the GTAP within the next couple of days. If you have any comments or feedback on the webinar, we'd love to hear them. When you close the webinar session, you're going to be presented with a few survey questions. We'd really appreciate it if you could just take a minute to give us a little feedback on how we did on the webinar today. If you think of anything you'd like to ask or you have any other comments, you can leave those in the GTAC Tech Talk section of the GTAP forum. We'll also have the general questions and answers from today's webinar in the as well as links to the webinar videos and a PDF version of the slides. We're going to have that posted in the forum soon as well. So once again, on behalf of myself and everyone here at the Genetec Technical Assistance Center, I'd like to thank you very much for attending the webinar today, and we hope you all have a great day. Thank you.